Good morning and welcome to RDA's 4-part webinar series centered around SharePoint 2013. Today's topic is SharePoint 2013 in the cloud and what you need to know. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for the series, Pablo Gazmiri. And Pablo is a principal architect with RDA and has led SharePoint efforts for a number of Fortune 500 companies. His SharePoint experience includes system architecture, governance, custom solutions, planning, mentoring, and training. With 15 years of development experience, Pablo is a web collaboration and search expert who has built numerous corporate intranets, extranets, e-commerce sites, and custom applications over the course of his career. He has recently assisted clients with build-outs of SharePoint 2013 portals and collaboration environments, and currently leads RDA's SharePoint 2013 migration offering. Pablo, thanks for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for that excellent introduction. Welcome to everyone who's dialed in today. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar. We're going to start just going over the agenda here. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few definitions of various cloud technologies. We'll have some quick demos. We'll see it in action, but for the most part, we're going to be just going through really all of the aspects when it comes to, or the basic aspects when it comes to getting SharePoint in the cloud and what your options are there. We'll also discuss the elephants in the room in terms of items that maybe people are a little apprehensive about when it comes to adopting the cloud in terms of reliability, security, and compliance. We'll talk about the cost of hosting SharePoint in the cloud, as well as what we consider the true value of the cloud and what really may bring you to adopt it, which may not be cost. Cost is actually not necessarily at this point the main driver. So before we get started, we did have one poll question here, and you can click on your screens to answer this question. If you have or are currently looking to adopt a cloud platform, which one are you using or evaluating? And if you're not, you can just say we're not currently using it or we're not currently considering it. Okay, so it looks like mostly Office 365, as well as a little bit of Amazon and Azure. So that's great. I think we'll talk through why you might choose Amazon or Azure over Office 365 or vice versa. It also looks like a lot of you are not currently using, but it looks like most of you are at least using or considering the cloud. So that's great. So I wanted to start with this picture. This is a data center, I believe in England, where they had been pouring concrete into the room next door to the data center, and there was a hole in the wall. This is the type of nightmare that might keep a data center manager or any IT manager up at night. And this is one of the reasons why the cloud is becoming more and more popular, because this problem is no longer on your plate. This type of nightmare is very unlikely to ever happen in an Azure or Amazon data center, and it's something that you can rely upon an external group to manage all of your physical infrastructure instead of having to worry about what might be happening at your corporate data center or local web host. This might be the biggest reason to go to the cloud. So let's talk about what our options are for SharePoint in the cloud. Most of us are probably familiar with on-premises SharePoint. When we're on-premises, we're running in our local data center or our corporate data center, or maybe we're even co-locating. But either way, we're responsible for almost the entire stack of the application down to the physical level. So we're worried about things like getting power to the servers, air conditioning the servers, having backup power, whether it's batteries or generators, configuring networking, and actually having outside lines to the internet coming into our data center, usually more than one, just in case someone with the backhoe might cut through your fiber line by mistake. You don't want to go down. So there's quite a lot of underlying infrastructure that we have to manage just so that we can host our applications, or in this case, SharePoint. With Azure or Amazon Web Services, with their IaaS offerings, and that stands for Infrastructure as a Service, you can basically lease VMs on an hourly or by the minute basis. And you don't have to worry about how those VMs are virtualized, what physical servers they're sitting on, how those servers access their storage, any of the network connectivity issues, firewalls, any of that is completely managed by the data center people at Azure and Amazon Web Services. So that's infrastructure as a service. You basically get the VM, and you can do whatever you want with the operating system. You patch it on your own schedule. You install your server applications and manage them entirely yourself. This stands in contrast to Office 365 and SharePoint Online, which is really a software as a service offering. So that's what SaaS stands for, software as a service. And you're probably familiar with other software as a service offerings from other companies. SharePoint Online provides you almost the full SharePoint feature set without having to manage any of the operating system level, middleware, runtime data, or application itself. All of that is managed by Microsoft. You get to control your particular site collections and settings such as on search, business connectivity services, or other back-end services for SharePoint, but you don't get, for example, full access to central administration. You don't have to worry about patching the servers. You don't have to worry about upgrades. All of that is handled by Microsoft. So for those of you who are interested in using SharePoint for collaboration and don't need to apply a lot of customizations to the environment, Office 365 is really your best choice, especially when it comes to avoiding the cost and pain of SharePoint migrations in the future. Now, there's another cloud stack that is not included on this graphic. It's Platform as a Service, PaaS, and it's sort of between infrastructure as a service and software as a service, where the cloud will manage your operating system, middleware, and runtime, but you handle deploying a custom application and any custom databases and things and connect those up. And this middle ground of Platform as a Service doesn't really apply to SharePoint, but it does offer some additional advantages. I'm not going to really talk about that too much today. So one question I get when talking about this is that we've had virtual private servers for years. You could call up a web host and get a VM provisioned in a fairly quick period of time, and you pay for that VM by the month, and you can do whatever you want with this. How is this any different? Well, a big difference is that infrastructure as a service cloud offerings are fully automated and scriptable. There's APIs available that allow you to spin up VMs in no time. You can turn your VMs on and off at any time, and you only get charged by the minute or by the hour. So you don't have to pay for a server for an entire month at a time if you're only going to use it for a couple of days. You can fully script the creation of a multi-server environment as well. So if you have a large SharePoint farm to install, maybe you've got multiple SQL servers, multiple app servers, multiple web servers, you can create a single script that will actually create those VMs, install all the software on it, and get it up and running. The other big difference is that these very large AWS and Azure data centers are run and secured by top-notch, world-class admins and security experts. And you can't necessarily say that about your typical web host. So one of the analogies we'd like to use to explain all of this is the idea of having your own garden. So when we're on-premise, it's kind of like we have our own private garden. We're worried about where the sprinklers are put, making sure we have water, making sure everything's fertilized, and we're sort of on our own. But it gives us a lot of power because we can put our plants wherever we want. We don't have to worry about bumping into anybody else. With Platform as a Service, and really with software as a service, it's more like a community garden where we get our own plot. We can do what we want within that plot, but we're relying on shared services. Things like, again, water, fertilizer, things like that might be shared. But with the cloud, we can build our own paradise in the cloud, so to speak. Now, this is an image of a man in China who happened to own the penthouse of a large apartment building, and he decided to build his own private mountain resort on top of all that. And he, I guess, made use of all the shared infrastructure of the building itself. Unfortunately, he didn't actually check to see whether the building could support his mountain, which it couldn't. So he ran into some trouble there. But with the cloud, you can build your own paradise on top of shared infrastructure. So before I jump into this slide, I actually want to go right into a demo and show you what some of this stuff looks like. So first, I'm going to switch over to Office 365. So this is a SharePoint environment in Office 365. It's sort of a typical team site. I've got a Visio services window here and some documents and announcements. Quickly, if I go to site settings, as an administrator of this site, I have most of the same options that I would have in a full SharePoint environment on-premise. I can configure search, site administration. I have site collection administration options that are pretty much the same as what I would have on-premise. What I don't get is access to central administration. Instead, we have a SharePoint Admin Center available for Office 365 SharePoint Online admins. And this gives us kind of a pared-down version of central administration. So here at the top level, I can control my site collections. I can create a new site collection. I can control info path. I can manage user profiles. I can do quite a bit of search administration. So if you have a custom search schema, want to build custom refiners, that can be done from Office 365, although the turnaround time on some of these changes can be up to 24 hours. So you don't have quite as much control as you would in an on-premise environment. So that's typically how you manage Office 365. The nice thing is here, there's no VMs to manage, there's no system to patch, there's no software to upgrade. It's all just here for you, and it works. It's a lot like perhaps Google Docs, if you're familiar with that. Now, on the Azure side, I get a very different type of dashboard. Instead of giving me SharePoint-specific options, the standard dashboard gives me access to things like virtual machines, SQL databases, storage accounts. And just as a quick demo here, I'm going to go ahead and fire up a new virtual machine. So I'm going to select New. I'm going to actually create from a gallery. And you can see I have quite a few options within this gallery of different types of virtual machines that I could spin up. I've got Oracle databases, Visual Studio preloaded. In this case, for this demo, I'm just going to pick a SharePoint Server 2013 trial. This is a great way to get started with SharePoint. In Azure, it allows you to very quickly stand up a VM that has a SharePoint software installed. But note that the SharePoint farm won't be configured for the automatic. I'd still have to take some additional steps. Now, you could script that, or you could create your own images. I have a number of VM sizes to choose from. In this case, I'm just going to choose 2 cores and 14 gigs of memory. I give myself an admin username along with a password. I don't want to get into too many of these options here, but I'm just going to pick an existing cloud service. Notice that I have the opportunity to host in a number of different regions. If I create a new cloud service, I can host in any of these regions here. So you can see I have a lot of options across the entire world. I'm going to go ahead and use an existing cloud service that happens to be in the eastern United States. And I'll use an automatic storage account. We'll talk about availability sets in a minute. I can also expose different services through the firewall automatically. So I'll go ahead and add HTTP since this will be a SharePoint server. And that's all I need just to create a VM. So this VM is going to start provisioning, and we'll go back to our slides here. So let's talk about reliability. What are they really guaranteeing when they say that there's a 99.95% uptime guarantee? With Office 365 and SharePoint Online, they worry about all this stuff. You don't have to worry about how to get that uptime. That uptime is guaranteed for the application itself, and SharePoint will move your Office 365 SharePoint instance around as they perform maintenance to make sure that it's always available, or almost always available. With Azure and AWS, they don't really guarantee that any particular VM instance is going to have 99.95% uptime. What they guarantee is that any particular data center or region that they're hosting out of is going to have 99.95% uptime. And for you to guarantee that level of uptime for your applications, you'll need to actually provision multiple VMs within the availability sets to control fault tolerance. So availability sets are directly related to fault domains and update domains. So what this means is within a given availability set, in Azure, Microsoft will ensure that at least one of the machines in the set is always available. So we put our, for example, our web servers in one availability set and our app servers and SQL servers in a different availability set. And that guarantees that when any particular hardware or base VM software is updated, it will only affect one of the VMs in the availability set at a time. So a fault domain is basically related to a single point of failure, and in this case, it's really just a particular rack, a server rack. So if you put machines in one availability set, they will be distributed across different server racks, and that will ensure that you get the 99.95% uptime. It's a common misconception that any VM is going to have this level of reliability. People think that perhaps they're using a technology such as vMotion to keep these VMs available, and that is not the case. They don't quite have the bandwidth to do that for all clients. Amazon Web Services is also financially backed. So if you have downtime outside of the 99.95% window, you will get anywhere between 10 and 30% of your bill reduced. So a typical SharePoint farm, either in AWS or in Azure, to maintain high availability, typically has a number of servers, usually 2 web servers, 2 app servers, 2 database servers, sometimes 3 database servers, as well as Active Directory servers. So it's recommended that you do host Active Directory in the data center with your SharePoint farm. It's possible to set it up so that you use Active Directory on-premise, but performance is greatly affected when you do that, and so it's not really supported. In Amazon, the way that availability is managed is a little bit different from in Azure. Instead of putting the same tier in an availability group, you create availability zones that cover one half of every tier. And so you guarantee that either one half of each tier is available or the other. And very similarly with Windows Azure. In Azure, every server comes with a system disk, but you also have to configure data disks for SQL and for Active Directory. And the way that those are configured is really dependent on how you're going to use them. And so there are some pretty detailed guides about how to configure that storage. There are different storage options available when you create disks in Azure. So it's not as simple as just spinning up the machines and provisioning some basic disks. You do have to follow some pretty specific instructions. And this is something that RDA can help you with. So let's talk about security. In Office 365, again, everything is handled by Microsoft. For the most part, you can grant logins to people within your organization. You can even grant access to outside partners, and really anybody with an email address can get into, if invited, to your SharePoint environment. And that's controlled by you at the site level, but in terms of the application and the servers, all of that security is handled by Microsoft. And their administrators can't even really go into your data and see anything specific. There are security controls in place for that. Within Azure and Amazon, you're configuring the VMs and you have direct access to the VMs. But what you can feel secure in knowing is that people with other VMs and other networks configured from other companies who might be using the same data centers, they can't see your VMs. They can't see your data. And that's all protected through the use of firewalls and routers, which are automatically configured when you create a cloud service, when you create a place for your VMs to live. And you can control the different network segments within the cloud where your servers live. So you can segment some servers from other servers and even create the equivalent of a DMZ within the cloud. So if you have some resources that are publicly exposed and some resources which are really for private use, you don't even have to put them in the same network. Now, one of the great things that both Azure and Amazon does is that they actually monitor the network. So if you were to log into your VM and start scanning ports and scanning IP addresses and trying to find holes in the routers, the administrators would see that, and they would actually investigate you, and in some cases even cut you off. And that's something that most people couldn't say of their corporate data centers. So from a security perspective, you're really walled off. Only you have access to your data, and there are quite a few controls in place to prevent anybody else from sneaking in or getting around those barriers. more so than in an on-premise data center. So overall, I would say it's likely that if you set it up properly, your cloud service is actually more secure than your on-premise data center. Another note, Azure has 12 staff members working in 3 shifts per 24 hours. So at any given point, they've got 9 armed security guards and 3 admins working. Those 3 administrators manage 350,000 physical servers, each of which may have a number of VMs loaded on them. So you're talking about, a million plus systems that are being administrated out of one data center. And from that perspective, you can see how there's a lot less overhead. And in particular, your data looks like a needle in a haystack. Even if the admins could get to it, they wouldn't know where to find it because all of this is automated and scripted. And that speaks to the level of automation and sophistication that Azure has in their systems. From a compliance perspective, AWS and Azure are not quite at parity. Amazon actually has slightly more certified compliance regimes that are available, whereas Azure is not quite as compliant, although they are working on it. This list is actually a little bit out of date. Azure is definitely PCI compliant, and also is on its way to being FISMA compliant. For those of you who are working with the government or in healthcare, you'll have to evaluate this carefully before you move to the cloud. And actually, Office 365, which is not shown here, is also compliant along a number of regimes, in fact, more so than Azure itself. So if you are, for example, a subject to FISMA, that is supported in Office 365. Full disclosure, I am not a compliance expert, so a lot of what I see on the screen is word soup to me. But for those of you who are knowledgeable about this stuff, you can see that there is quite a lot of compliance in the cloud. So let's talk about cost. To build a fully redundant SharePoint farm in Azure, you typically need at least, I'd say 6 or 7 machines, and that's due to the fact that we need Active Directory there. We need at least 2 web front ends, and really we should have 2 Active Directory controllers, 2 databases to make sure that they can be clustered, and then 1 database to act as a witness. And so in this example, we're looking at somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000, depending on whether we prepay for a year or pay per month. So if we prepay, we're looking at about $30,000. For a year, we're looking at over $50,000. And so it's possible that you can do this for cheaper on-premise, right? If you go and buy servers from your local Best Buy or buy personal hardware, it can be a lot cheaper over the long term. But you're not going to have as quality a hosting environment. You're not going to have the security, both physical and from a technology perspective. And you're still going to have to manage all those resources and have admins who know how to pull servers out of racks and all that. So when it comes to the overall cost, I believe that the cloud does have a little bit of an edge for the most part if you value those things. If you're looking at Amazon Web Services, the typical SharePoint farm in Amazon is going to cost about $43,000. They do not offer discounts for prepay, so there's some difference there. And obviously these costs will change depending on how many users you have accessing the farm. You may need additional servers. You may need additional bandwidth. So these are really just initial estimates for a typical farm. So what is the true value of the cloud? We can see here this goldfish jumping out of one tank and into the other is, I think, what we call an early adopter. But that goldfish, if he's going to the cloud, he's going to be able to do some things that his competitors can't. He's going to be able to quickly move into new regions of the world. He's going to be able to spin up new applications. And really, fundamentally, what the cloud gives us that we don't have today, if we're not using the cloud, is flexibility. So we can do things that we couldn't do before. I don't know about you, but I don't speak Mandarin. So if my boss asked me to set up a SharePoint farm in Asia, I would have a hell of a time except that with Azure, I simply select Asia from the drop-down when I provision my farm, and there it is. I don't have to worry about negotiating with the data center in China. I don't have to worry about any of the complexities that might come along with that. I just select that region from the drop-down, and my servers are there. Similarly, if I'm spinning up a development environment, I have, in almost no time at all, a couple hours, I can have a very powerful SharePoint environment, fully functional in the cloud. In many on-premise data centers, that can take some time just to get the approvals to create a new VM. So you can contract with Azure to make any number of cores available at any given time, and you simply pay for what you use. Furthermore, we can shut down machines when they're not in use. So whether that's during a slow season or even at night, we can ensure that we're only paying for the capacity that we're using. So another advantage really is that, as I mentioned, speed. So this is an image of the Helios spacecraft that was launched to study the sun during the 1970s. This spacecraft achieved a maximum speed of about 150,000 miles an hour. It's the fastest man-made object. So, similarly with the cloud, we can be faster than our competitors. We can do things that are disruptive, and we can do things really in ways that surprise our competition if we learn how to do this before they do. And we also can be an expert at less. We don't have to worrying about details like how servers are configured, how network is going to be available, how power is going to be made available. We can focus on just our applications. Which brings me to some common uses and really ways to dip your toes into the cloud if you're looking at experimenting with the cloud. And some of this is available in Office 365, like, for example, creating some form of extranet sites. If you wanted to put up an intranet site, the cloud is a really good option, especially since those sites would then, even though they're externally accessible, they would not be situated within your data center. So that would limit any kind of exposure to your on-premise data. So if you're talking about, well, I don't want to go to the cloud because I'm not sure about security, this sort of turns the argument on its head. It says, if you're going to let people into one of your servers, would you rather have that server be on-premise or in the cloud? Most would say I'd rather not have it in my data center where, if for some reason there is a security hole, no one would be able to get to my secure data. So for things like client sites, file drops, internet sites, the cloud's a great place to get started. Again, as I mentioned before, seasonal or daily workloads, you can pay for capacity when needed and shut down servers overnight or during the slow season. So if you have some workloads, perhaps you don't have capacity in your data center, perhaps you don't want to, buy racks of servers that are only going to be used a few hours a night, the cloud is a great option. And finally, for those of you who already have on-premise applications, SharePoint or otherwise, you can use Azure as a disaster recovery solution. You can back up your VMs right into Azure and have them sitting cold until you need them and then turn them on. And so you don't really pay for that almost hot, really warm backup until they're turned on, with the exception of the storage that is used for those VHDs and for the databases. So certainly, come and talk to us at RDA. We can help you with any of these things, as well as just moving everything into the cloud. So a little bit about RDA. RDA helps our clients leverage technology to get your business moving. We solve complex business challenges that can often get companies stuck, costing time, resources, and money. What makes us different than other custom app services is that we start with the business problem first and work from there to develop IT solutions that solve the problem in a way that maximizes value and reduces risk. Our experienced team takes the time to understand our clients' needs, and we work with you on-site if possible, as well as from our corporate development center. We do development in .NET, SharePoint, BI, as well as cloud and mobile applications. We've been around for about 26 years. We have technology centers all around the East Coast, although we do work with clients as far away as Alaska or Bermuda. If any of you are in Bermuda, I'd love to work with you. We don't offshore our staff. Our development center in Baltimore provides an onshore, lower-cost development capability that allows us to offer a blended rate and deliver better value without the downsides of offshore development. With 26 years of growth in IT, RDA has proven expertise and experience. Our clients and our projects are testament to that. With so many of our projects coming from repeat customers, you can be sure that we deliver consistent value and that our clients enjoy working with us. We do have 4 core specialties that I mentioned before. Architectural guidance includes custom app dev and cloud strategies. Cloud and workflow is basically our SharePoint practice. We do business intelligence, both sort of traditional SSIS and SSRS development, as well as SharePoint integrated business intelligence. And our mobile application development team helps clients with mobile app and strategies across all major smartphone platforms. So these technology teams within RDA really work to foster a high level of technical ability and really make sure that we do things in a consistent manner. The average RDA consultant has been with the company for more than 8 years. It's because we treat our consultants well and truly value their technical expertise, and this pays back for our clients in terms of high quality and continuity between projects. Our team's highly experienced and made up of thought leaders who contribute to the community in the form of books, white papers, blog posts, and speaking engagements at user groups and conferences. We're passionate about IT, and we love our core values, as you can see on the screen. So real quick, I'm going to jump back. If any of you have any questions, please think about them or submit them to the QA, or feel free to unmute. And I'm going to jump back to my Windows Azure demo here. We can see I have this SP demo VM that I've just created. It's up and running. And we can see a nice little graph that shows us sort of what's happening on that VM. I'm going to go ahead and connect to it. And this brings me up a remote desktop window. I'm just going to type in my password if I remember it. And here we go. I have a brand new VM up on the screen. I hope you all can see that. From here, I can't just jump right into central administration because SharePoint needs to be configured. But the SharePoint, let's see if I can get to it. The SharePoint software is installed, and I can go right into the configuration wizard from here and start configuring a farm. So, in a very short period of time, less than 10 minutes or so, I was able to create a brand new VM and can start using it for real work. And there you can see the configuration wizard is up and running. So really quite powerful to be able to create these resources, access them right away. And then when I'm done with it, I'll show you this briefly here. I'm going to go back to the VM window. Let me, I have to close my... Bear with me just a second.
And Pablo, whenever you're ready, we do have a few questions.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to my Windows Azure view, and I can simply go right back to this VM and select either to shut it down, or I can just delete it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and delete the VM with the attached disks, and I will no longer be paying for this VM. Okay, let's get to the questions.
Super. So again, if anybody does have a question, you can ask it live by dialing *6 to unmute your own line, or you can shoot it to the Q&A interface at the top of the live meeting. So the first question is, can third-party tools be installed on a cloud-based implementation of SharePoint?
Yes, that's a very good question. I should have gotten to that. So if you're using Azure or AWS and you provision VMs there, you have full control over those operating systems, and you can install whatever custom applications you'd like, whether it's server-side or a SharePoint 2013 app. If you're using Office 365 and SharePoint Online, you cannot install custom applications at the server level. What you can do is customize your Office 365 instance. So, for example, I can upload a new master page or page layout. I can develop basically JavaScript-based applications that run your business code in the browser itself. I can develop applications for the SharePoint App Store, and I can use any of the existing App Store applications. So there is a lot of capability, but depending on the type of work or the type of customization you want to make in SharePoint, SharePoint Online may not be your best option, and you may need to look at putting your SharePoint farm in Azure instead. One of the bigger limitations of SharePoint Online is the BI capabilities. Although you can do things like upload Excel Power Pivot models and interact with them, you cannot refresh them automatically, and you can't connect directly to your on-premise cubes. So if you're doing really heavy BI or any really heavy custom application development that lives on the server side, you're going to want to provision a infrastructure as a service-based farm in Azure or Amazon.
All right, and the next question, can you use the sandbox for development when using the cloud?
Yes. Yes, there's no reason you can't create a sandbox environment or even use one of Microsoft's free demos. So, for example, you can sign up and get, I think it's either a 30 or 90-day demo for free of Office 365. And from there, we commonly use that as a prototype environment or a sandbox environment. We do development there sometimes, and then we'll bring those assets that we've created, we'll download them using SharePoint Designer or just the browser, and then upload them into a production environment to make them available.
All right, another question. Say you start out with SharePoint Online, and then down the road you need to deploy customizations. Is it possible to migrate that online environment into Azure?
It is possible to migrate the data. What you won't have access to is the raw content database. So for things like in-place workflows, if you're running workflows that are in progress, those are going to be a little bit more difficult to migrate than if you just have a number of documents in a document library. Those can be migrated fairly easily, either by hand or by using a third-party tool such as Metalogic's Content Matrix, which will allow you to connect to both SharePoint farms, your Office 365 environment as well as your Azure farm, and move content between them with a good amount of fidelity.
All right. Are add-ons installed at the farm, top site, or sub-site level?
So apps are installed at the site collection and site level. And any customizations in terms of like a custom WSP solution would be installed at the farm level. So if you have a solution that's packaged as a WSP, you won't be able to use it in SharePoint Online unless it's a sandbox solution, which is a special type of solution. And those sandbox solutions are also installed at the site collection level. Otherwise, SharePoint apps, such as that are available in the App Store, can be installed at the site collection or site level.
All right, and let's see. Can I extend the SharePoint trial VM to work indefinitely and not expire?
Yes, so the SharePoint trial VM was the VM that I just created in Azure in our demo here. And simply by upgrading the license key to an enterprise or standard license, you'll extend the demo indefinitely.
All right, and let's see. Can I connect SharePoint Online to our on-premise Active Directory?
Oh, great question. So when you first provision Office 365, you will get an instance of what's called Azure Active Directory connected to that. And so you have basically your own domain, whatever name you choose, .onmicrosoft.com. So you can then provision users very quickly just using the online dashboard. And I can show that a little bit. But that is basically a completely separate Active Directory domain than your on-premise Active Directory. If you have an existing on-premise Active Directory, you would need to replicate it up to Azure. In fact, actually using infrastructure as a service in Azure, and then set up what's called an ADFS proxy, which connects to your extended Active Directory in Azure and links it up to SharePoint Online, and really all of Office 365. So you could use your local Active Directory users to access everything from SharePoint to Exchange to Link.
And just a clarification, what was the name of the service that you mentioned for switching over the content from SharePoint to Azure as opposed to doing it by hand?
Metalogix is the company, and Content Matrix is the product. And RDA is a partner of Metalogix. We use their Content Matrix product to perform migrations for clients when necessary.
Perfect. All right. We're coming to the end of our time, and looks like pretty much around the end of our questions. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was the second installment of our four-part series. The next one is scheduled for next Thursday, July 24th at 11, and that one is around the do's and don'ts of migrating to SharePoint 2013. So if you'd like more information on the series or information about how to get started, please feel free to visit our website at rdacorp.com or reach out to Pablo or the marketing group, and I think we have that slide up and showing. And that concludes our session for today. So have a great rest of the day, and we look forward to you joining us next week.